Hi, welcome to the seventh session of Consumer Choice Theory. My name is Elias. So in this video, I want to take you through the consumer's equilibrium. Now, when determining the consumer's equilibrium, we are looking at the intersection or the point of tangency between the indifference curves and the budget line. Therefore, it should be noted here that if you have not yet understood the budget line or the indifference curves, please go back and listen to those videos before you proceed to this session. If you have, then join me and let's move on the same page and see how we can develop further theories for microeconomics. So a consumer is in equilibrium when given personal income and price constraints, the consumer maximizes the total utility or satisfaction from his or her expenditure. Now, the consumer will have a given money income, and when he goes to buy commodities, he will find there are different prices for the commodities that he or she wants to buy. If we assume only two commodities, X and Y, it means the consumer will now have to allocate the income between the commodity X and the commodity Y. And from all these allocations, the consumer should maximize the satisfaction. Now, utility is maximized at the point of tangency between the budget line and the indifference curve, meaning that when we find the slope for the indifference curve and the slope for the budget line, where the two are equal, that defines the consumer's equilibrium. As such, the condition for equilibrium is that the marginal rate of substitution for good x for y, which is the slope of an indifference curve, must be equal to the negative of the price ratios for price of good x and price of good y, which is the slope of the budget line. So, choice principle suggests a consumer will choose the highest ranked available option. This means that given an indifference map where you have indifference curve 1, 2, 3, and 4, the consumer will choose which of these will be the highest possible utility maximizing indifference curve by looking at the current income and the price levels for the two commodities. It should be noted that if the budget of the consumer limits him or her to only this indifference curve here, to only indifference curve 1, it means that for this consumer, utility is maximized at indifference curve 1 given the income. The consumer will not be able to reach higher levels of utility because the given income has limited the consumer to indifference curve 1. As such, then this means that the consumer will choose number 1, a bundle on the budget line but not below the budget line. It should be noted that all points below the budget line are feasible, but they are not utility maximizing. The second point is that a bundle on the highest indifference curve that touches the budget line must be chosen because it's only that point that exhausts the entire income of the consumer while the consumer maximizes utility on that indifference curve. Let's look at the graphical illustration of equilibrium. So on the vertical axis, we put good y, and on the horizontal axis, we put good x. With an indifference map where we have indifference curves 1 all the way to 3, it should be noted that indifference curve 1 has lower utility compared to indifference curve 2, and indifference curve 2 has lower utility compared to indifference curve 3. This means that the higher the indifference curve you have, the more the satisfaction a consumer will generate from a combination lying on that indifference curve. From here, we can also draw a budget line which will show the income and the prices of the two commodities that the consumer is facing. Out of this, we can put our vertical intercept. Now, recall that on the vertical intercept, the value going there is income divided by the price of y. And on the horizontal intercept, we have income divided by the price of x. With this put, we can define our equilibrium point, and we can call it as point E, which means only at this point is the consumer maximizing utility. And at point E, the slope of an indifference curve 2 is equal to the slope of the budget line. Indifference curve 1 has points that are feasible, but however, because it lies on a lower level, it will not give the consumer maximum satisfaction. It should also be noted that indifference curve 3 is unattainable for the consumer because the given income and the price levels will not allow the consumer go all the way to indifference curve 3. The only way the consumer will reach indifference curve 3 is if the income increases or the prices reduces, or both the income increase and the reduction in prices. So we can define that point E, that at that point the marginal rate of substitution of good X for Y is equal to the price of X divided by the price of Y and attaching a negative, which means that the slopes are equal at that point. So this is the consumer's equilibrium condition. It should be noted that this is the consumer's equilibrium condition. So if you are solving such a question, it can be a utility function or graphs or numbers. It should be noted that for you to be in equilibrium, the marginal rate of substitution must be equal to the price ratios. Okay, so which we can conclude that point E is a consumer maximizing utility point, and therefore the consumer is in equilibrium. This is the graph for the Cobb-Douglas utility function. We can also have the Leontief, the perfect substitute, as well as the constant elasticity of substitution. In this video, I will present the Cobb-Douglas, which I've just presented, and the Leontief. The perfect substitute and the CES, which is constant elasticity of substitution, will be left for your own practice. Let's look at the Leontief. So on the vertical axis, we put good Y, and on the horizontal, we put good X. With the indifference curves, which are L-shaped, we know that for Leontief, which is perfect complement, the indifference curves are L-shaped because the goods are consumed in a fixed proportion. 2 slices of bread against 1 bottle of Fanta. 2 slices of bread against 1 bottle of Fanta. So if you increase the slices of bread to 4, it means you need 2 bottles of Fanta. So that's what we mean when we say fixed proportion. So from here, we can also note that indifference curve 3 has a higher utility compared to indifference curve 1, and therefore the direction of increasing utility is given by those arrows. As such, we can define our consumer's equilibrium by drawing the budget line, which is tangent to indifference curve 2 at the corner, and that point we can call it point E. So at point E, it should be noted that the consumer will only be in equilibrium at the corner. If in the case of bread, if you give the consumer 4 slices of bread and 1 bottle of Fanta, the other 2 slices will not be eaten, they will be left. However, if you give the consumer 2 slices of bread and 1 bottle of Fanta, all the bread will be eaten and the Fanta will be consumed, and therefore the consumer will settle in equilibrium at the corner. So it should be noted that at that point, the marginal rate of substitution of X for Y must be equal to the price ratios, which is price of X divided by the price of Y, and put a negative. Therefore, the consumer maximizes utility at point E, which is his or her equilibrium point. Okay, so let's now look at the corner solution. Now, corner solution occurs when the consumer is in equilibrium along a given axis, either the horizontal or the vertical axis. What that means is that for a consumer, he will only consume 1 item. If it's on the horizontal axis, it means he will only be consuming good X. If it is on the vertical, he will only be consuming good Y and 0 of X. That's what makes it a corner solution. So on the vertical axis, we put good Y. On the horizontal, we put good X. And with the indifference curves moving from the horizontal axis, increasing utility occurs as you move to the right. Now with that, we can draw our budget line, which is tangent, touching indifference curve 2 at the axis. And you should note that this kind of an intersection has an implication that the slope of the indifference curve is less or equal to the slope of the budget line. This is the case. Try to extend the indifference curve here. You'll notice that if you extend the indifference curve, it will move in this direction, and if you extend the budget line, it will move in this direction. So you'll notice that at the corner, if you extend, the budget line will actually cut the indifference curve, which tells you that then the slopes are not equal at that corner. So at that corner, it may be equal or it may not be equal depending on how you've drawn them. So therefore, the condition becomes that the slope of the indifference curve is always less or equal to the slope of the budget line at the corner. Okay, so we can also look at it from the vertical axis, vertical intercept. So with good y on the horizontal and good x, good y on the vertical and good x on the horizontal, we have these indifference curves, and the direction of increasing utility is up and to the right. So which shows that if we draw the budget line with the intercepts m over py on vertical and m over px on the horizontal, we are in equilibrium at the corner where indifference curve 2 is meeting the budget line. At that corner, it should be noted that the slope of the indifference curve is greater or equal to the slope of the budget line. This is the case because try to recall that as you move the budget line up, if you start tilting it from here going up, the budget line will be becoming flatter and flatter, and therefore the slope will be becoming smaller and smaller. Now, because of this negative which you have here, if this part is becoming smaller, it means you are increasing the value. So therefore, you'll be drawing nearer to the slope of the indifference curve. But if you start tilting it this side, it will become steep, and if it's steep, it means it will be infinity, and therefore the value will be negative infinite, which will be less than the marginal rate of substitution. Okay, so let's look at the changes in prices and how these changes affect the consumer's equilibrium. So recall that an increase in prices tilt the budget line inwards, and the decrease in prices tilts the budget line outwards. So with that, then we're saying when the consumer is in equilibrium, a change in the price of a commodity alters the position of the equilibrium point. Now, what this means is that if you hold the income level constant and the price of one good constant, and then you alter the price of the other commodity, the slope of the budget line will change. With this, the intercept will also change. Therefore, the position of the budget line will be altered. Note that the intercept on the axis, now when we are looking at the axis, it's specifically the axis of a commodity which has received a change in price. And therefore, this intercept will change. Let's look at the graphical illustration of the change in prices. Consider an increase in the price of good X with good Y on the vertical axis and good X on the horizontal axis, and our initial equilibrium point being point A, where the budget line is tangent to indifference curve 2. An increase in the price will change the budget line in which direction? Try to guess before I do my presentation here. Okay, so if you guessed inwards, you are correct along the x-axis. So the budget line will tilt inwards, and we are moving our equilibrium point to point B. Now, with this new level, you will notice that since the price has increased, the consumer's purchasing power will reduce. This reduction in purchasing power is the one that causes the budget line to shift inwards, because the price here, what you have as the intercept, recall that this part now has become big. So holding income constant, when you increase the denominator, the whole ratio becomes smaller. Therefore, the intercept will move inwards. With that, it should be noted that the price of good X has become high. Therefore, the consumer will purchase less of good X. So notice, compare point A and point B. At point A, we are at this much of X. At point B, we are at this much of X, which is a reduction. And in the same line, you will notice that for good Y, the consumer has increased the purchase because the price remained constant, and probably good Y has become appealing to the consumer. Let's look at the case of a reduction in price. If there is a decrease in price with good Y on the vertical axis and good X on the horizontal axis and our initial equilibrium at point C, where the consumer is in equilibrium on indifference curve 1, a reduction in price will tilt the budget line outwards, and therefore the new equilibrium point, point D, will be defined. With this, it should be noted that the decrease in price has increased the consumer's purchasing power, which the consumer can now allocate between the purchase of good Y and good X. However, the consumer has decided to buy more of good X and reduce the purchase of good Y because good X has now become cheaper. So the consumer moves to a higher indifference curve 2 and increases the utility levels. Okay, so this is all about the changes in price. Let's look at the changes in income and how these changes affect the consumer's equilibrium. With good Y on the vertical axis and good X on the horizontal axis and our initial equilibrium at point C, where indifference curve 1 is a tangent to a given budget line, then an increase in the consumer's income will shift the budget line upwards and therefore have the new equilibrium point, point D. Now, it should be noted that now that the consumer has more income, which means the purchasing power has increased, and the consumer can buy more of both X and Y or more of one. In this case, you will notice that if you are moving from point C to point D, given that both X and Y are normal goods, then the consumer will increase the purchase of both commodities. If Y was an inferior good, while X is a normal good, the budget line was going to shift somewhere in this direction, somewhere here. Which means at this point, the consumer was going to purchase more of X and less of Y, because with an increase in income for inferior goods, the purchases reduce. So in our case that we have, both X and Y are normal goods. If you have a reduction in income, it will be a different direction. The budget line will shift inwards, and therefore the equilibrium points will change, but I've left that for your end of session exercise. Okay, so now let's look at the price consumption curve and the consumer's equilibrium. So when we are looking at the price consumption curve, it is a locus of points showing the different equilibrium positions for different levels of prices. Now, what this means is that for any given equilibrium point, as you increase or as you change your prices, the equilibrium points will be changing. And these points are what constitute the price consumption curve. So holding income and price of Y fixed, if we vary the price of good X, then the set of optimal bundles traced out by the various budget lines is called the price consumption curve. In other words, the point of equilibriums for all the new budget lines will become the price consumption curve. So graphically, looking at good Y on the vertical and good X on the horizontal and our initial equilibrium on indifference curve 1, it means that if the price of the commodity reduced, the budget line will tilt outwards, and therefore new equilibrium will be spotted on indifference curve 2. If price reduces further, you'll notice that the budget line will tilt outward, and the new equilibrium will be spotted on indifference curve 3. When price reduces again, you'll notice that the budget line again will tilt outwards, and the new equilibrium will be spotted on indifference curve 4. Now, it is these points which we are calling the locus of points. So it is these points that constitute the price consumption curve. So if we draw a smooth curve joining all these points, we have what we call the price consumption curve. It should be noted that the price consumption curve need not be a straight line in all cases. It can be a curve, it can be a box, depending on how your equilibrium points are moving. So all you need to do is use your free hand and draw the line that will join those points, and it will be the price consumption curve. Okay, let's look at the income consumption curve. So the income consumption curve is a locus of points showing the different equilibrium points for different income levels. Now, this time around, what is changing is the income. And recall that the change in income shifts the budget line. Consider holding preferences and relative prices constant. The income consumption curve traces out how these changes in income affect the consumption of the consumer, and it is thus the set of odd tangencies between the budget line and the indifference curve as the budget line moves outward due to the increase in income. Now, if you consider a decrease in income, it means that it will be tracing all points as income is reducing. Let's look at the graphical illustration with good Y on the vertical axis and good X on the horizontal axis, and our initial equilibrium point on indifference curve 1. An increase in income will shift the budget line outward, and the new equilibrium will be spotted on indifference curve 2. If income increases further to M3, the budget line will shift outwards, and the equilibrium will be spotted on indifference curve 3. If income increases further to M4, it means the budget line will shift outwards again, and the new equilibrium will be spotted on indifference curve 4. If you draw a smooth curve joining these points, you have what we call the income consumption curve. It should also be noted here that the income consumption curve need not be a straight line. It can be a curve or any other shape that you have depending on the nature of the goods you are dealing with. Recall, we said that if Y was inferior and X was normal, as income is increasing, the curve, indifference curve, will be moving down. So it means we are going to draw it somewhere here to show that Y has reduced, so Y level reduces, and further we'll have it somewhere here, and further we'll have it somewhere there. And if we draw a smooth curve joining these points, you will notice that the income consumption curve is moving downwards. So please take note, and in your drawings, make sure you consider the equilibrium points in coming up with the income consumption curve. With that, we can now move and look at the angel curve. Now, the angel curve for a good shows the relationship between income and the amount consumed, holding everything else constant. That is, keeping the prices, keeping the preferences constant. What we have then is that it's a curve that plots the relationship between quantity of one good consumed and the income. So with income on the vertical axis and the and the quantity consumed on the horizontal, then the curve that shows the relationship between the two is what we call the angel curve. It's a path. So it measures income on the vertical and amounts on the horizontal. So angel curve slopes upwards for a normal good and slopes downward for an inferior good. The angel curve for inferior goods is backward bending. It should be noted that as you increase, it will move to a certain level and then start bending backwards. So on the next slide, I'll show you how these curves are presented. So here we go. So we have good X on the horizontal and then income on the vertical. So you'll notice that because this curve is moving up and to the right, then it is for a normal good, and the one which is moving increasing and then afterwards starts to move back is for an inferior good. So the angel curve for inferior goods is backward bending. Okay. Thank you very much for watching. See you in the next video. Please, if you have any question, send me an email to muauelias@gmail.com. I will be sharing with you the YouTube link that you can use to watch the videos at your own time. Thank you very much.